Aaron VanTrojen is with us. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Ron.
So let's chat a little bit. What are you seeing in the mortgage world? I mean, obviously yesterday was an ugly day. Where do you think it's going forward?
The mortgage industry in general?
No, I'm talking about, as far as the individual that wants to get a mortgage or mortgage rates. I mean, I know there's no guarantees or anything like that, but what are you seeing in the marketplace?
Well, I mean, interest rates are going to go down. I mean, the Federal Reserve already stated 3 Fed cuts this year, which will drive long-term interest rates down. That's going to happen if the Fed stated it's going to happen. It's almost guaranteed to happen. It's just a question of when. And I think that most of the public, including the industry that I'm in, has misjudged that. We were initially calling for Fed cuts as early as March, even though there was no data supporting a cut in March. And now the data that's coming out now is pushing that date, kicking the can down the road. So early estimates of the first Fed cut, talking probably June, July at best case scenario. And it might come even toward the tail end of the third quarter or even fourth quarter before we see the Fed cut rates. Now, there's a million different variables that can come into play between now and then. Unforeseen variables, which I always bring up. But based on all the data we have right now, there's zero reason for the Fed to start cutting rates right now.
So the question that comes up to me that I've been posing and contemplating as well is I saw the same reports that you did, three to four rate cuts this year, and again the same thing that you've said. No reason for them to be early. I've been talking about the second quarter is probably when they'll start. But the other part of it is if the data doesn't show it in that second quarter, the Fed also says they don't want to be political and be involved in elections. And if they started doing their cutting closer to the election time, do you think that's going to have a effect, a positive or negative, toward their thought process of cutting?
It shouldn't. Whether it does or not, that's a whole different discussion. Listen, I think that you have to, you'd like to think that the Fed operates the way they're supposed to, where they don't take politics into account for their decisions. And again, we could argue that back and forth whether they do or don't. Remember who appointed Powell,
Right.
and so initially. So I have some faith that he's going to do what he thinks is best for the economy, more so than what he thinks is best for the president. We'll see how that plays out. But if it takes him until third or fourth quarter to start cutting rates, that's only because he's going to have economic data that states that he's supposed to be doing that at that time. We already know that the Fed is going to be behind. No matter what they do, they're going to be behind. So they're going to probably start cutting rates late, just like they started raising rates late. They're going to be behind. So if it happens in November and it helps the election, people are going to, the conspiracy theorists will say that he's in Biden's back pocket. I honestly don't think that's going to be the case. I think he's going to cut interest rates the minute he thinks that the economy is slowing to the point that he needs to.
Do you think they're going to follow? Like I saw this morning that the PCE for the last 6 months has been running at like 1.8, 1.9 on the core PCE rate, and they're talking about wanting a 2%. Does that affect what you're thinking as far as going to second quarter and not having the data for anything sooner?
I think it might. I don't know if the Fed has ever come out, or at least the chairman said that they're going to put more weight on PCE versus CPI. I mean, CPI carries a lot of weight. You see what happened yesterday, right? It moved markets. And like you stated in the introduction, there was a gross overreaction to those numbers. Inflation is still coming down, but it missed to the upside, and it continues to do so, as does employment numbers. PCE numbers, again, might be able to trump the CPI numbers if we really miss to the downside. And I think that could carry some weight and make the decision sooner. But I don't think that the PCE numbers have been missing enough for it to influence a rate cut early.
Now, one of the other things I wanted to chat with you about is we look at historically again the spread between a 10-year treasury and a 30-year mortgage historically is about 1.79. Right now, we're looking at that being almost 3%. It's at 2.8, I think it is right now. What do you think is causing that spread? Is it the higher rates and that people don't want to, the mortgage industry is saying, something, we know that they're going to keep their loans shorter period of time. How's that affecting? What's the effect there?
Again, I'm not an economist. It was not my degree, but what I've been told, that actually has a lot to do with quantitative easing and the purchasing of bonds by the Fed, more so, which is why it's gotten so out of whack over time. And I do believe that you will see that trend back because, like you stated, as long as I've been in the business, the spread hasn't been nearly as great as it is right now. But neither has the stimulus that we've experienced, in 2020 and 2021.
Do you think that has anything to do with, and this is an area that I have absolutely no clue about. I know you know a lot more about it than I do. The servicing area, when servicers go to buy a loan, from what I understand, and I think most of my education has come from you, there's about 3/4 to a point in that a servicer will pay somewhere in that range. And if they don't think that the loans are going to stay, if they think that the interest rates are going to drop, that means more people are going to refinance, so they're not going to have that loan as long, so they can't make as much money. Do you think that has any effect on that spread?
Yeah, it certainly might. And there's been a strange dynamic that's also happened in the last 2 years in the mortgage industry, that the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of mortgage banks out there, the only way that they've been able to maintain any sense of profitability is by selling servicing. So there's been a tremendous amount of servicing rights being sold right now. And there's also an interesting dynamic with being able to sell servicing rights, because most of the mortgage companies are holding interest rates at 3% and 4%. Who wants that, right? Who wants a note rate at 3 to 4% when the current note rate is, in the 7s, let's just say. Right. At the same time, the mortgage industry realizes that if you're originating a bunch of loans right now in the 7s, and there's an overwhelming chance that interest rates are going to come down in the not so distant future, all the loans that you put on your books right now are going to run off your books in the next, say, 12 to 24 months. So it's a very strange place that we're at, because nobody really wants a 3% rate that's not going to run off because it's only at a 3% rate. At the same time, they don't want a 7.5% rate that's going to run off in 6 to 12 months.
So it's a kind of between a rock and a hard place.
Yes.
Type thing. Yes. Crazy stuff. Continuing our conversation, Aaron VanTrojen, CEO, Geneva Financial, is with us, chatting about, we talked about a lot about mortgages in the last segment. How about real estate, Aaron? Where are you seeing real estate going? Do you think it's? I think you and I might share the same thing. We both saw some of these posts out there that buy the home and rent the mortgage or something dumb like that. What are your thoughts about those kind of things?
Well, we're in another interesting dynamic. The Fed in 2022 is probably the first chairman that ever stated publicly that home prices needed to pull back. He said that publicly, which shocked me, but he was actually telling the truth. I haven't heard a lot of speak about that since, but that's a true factor. Is that inflation's been a big deal. It's been hurting everybody. Nobody likes inflation, except when it comes to your house. So if you're a homeowner, nobody's complaining about the inflation that's taking part in your house, which has experienced more inflation than any other commodity in existence. It's up, some 40% over the last few years, which is astronomical, unobtainable, and unsustainable. So he's right to get home affordability where it needs to be. I think they said that the average home price needed to fall 17%. Do we see a housing dip of 17% in the near future? Not likely. Not likely. And even with the drastic increases in interest rates, it's not that the interest rates are, they are as high as they've been in some 20-some years, but, hovering around in the high 6s and the 7% isn't ridiculous. It's just ridiculous from what we've been accustomed to for such a long period of time. And even with the rising interest rates, home prices are coming down. As you stated earlier, nationally, I think they're up nearly 5% year over year. They are down in some areas. I reside in the Phoenix metro area. We're down 5% year over year. But we also had faster growth than practically everybody. So you'll see that Seattle, Austin, San Francisco, there's a lot of markets out there that actually are down. Some are down double digits year over year. But nationally, home prices are still up. Like I said, about 5%. Your issue is that you still have a hot economy, so people still want to be in the housing market if they can, if they haven't been hurt by the economy. Again, the middle class and upper middle class, and certainly the upper class, has not been tremendously hurt by inflation. It's usually the lower class that gets hurt by that first. So they're still on the market. They're a little bit hesitant to be buying a house at the all-time highs. Home prices are the highest they've ever been, and interest rates are the highest they've been in 23 years. So is now a great time to buy a house? I say it always depends on the individual. For some people, yes, right now is the best time to buy a house, but it really depends on your particular situation. So what do I think is going to come with the housing? I mean, listen, we're contrarians. For interest rates to come down, the economy needs to get bad, right?
Yep.
The worse the economy gets, the better for us, at least over a short period of time. I know that sounds terrible, but stock market crashes, recessions are good for the mortgage industry, at least short term, and they lower interest rates. So let's just say that were to happen, interest rates would come down, but would it hurt the home buyer enough that they wouldn't be able to actually purchase homes? Two, we have an inventory problem, right? We still have an inventory problem. One, the cost of construction is still skyrocketing. It's still going up. So that hasn't changed, and that's not likely going to change in the foreseeable future. There's a lot of home builders that have product on market right now at exceptionally high prices. So what's to motivate them to build a whole bunch more supply, only bringing down the home prices of the existing homes they have on the market? And then you still run into the people that have a 3% mortgage, and how motivated are they to upgrade to another house at a 7% mortgage? Right. So you got all these variables that are making this thing very, very challenging. And I don't necessarily have the answer on how we unwind all that. But it's going to happen. Something's going to give, something's going to break, and it might be the economy that does it.
Well, something, a lot of the business people are basically saying that that's what the Fed really has to do in order to break inflation, is break the economy. So the question becomes, I shared a chart last week, I think it was, that I think the only time period in the last 50 years or 60 years where we had a 10-year run where housing prices were down was 2006. Other than that, every single 10-year period, if you bought in 2007, by 2017, you're a positive area. But if the Federal Reserve needs to break the economy to break inflation, do you think we're going to see a lot of foreclosures, or is there too many people that still have that 3% and 4% loan that are in too much equity that we're not going to see the foreclosures come back like we saw in 2009 and 10?
Well, 9 and 10 was, created by the mortgage industry and cheap money for too long. We're not repeating that right now. This is a different problem that actually could have a similar result. I'm not calling for another crisis of 2008. I don't think it would be on that scale, but I do think that there are warning signs right now that you have at least a potential for a credit crisis. And again, I don't want to be taken here and people saying, Aaron thinks we're going to have a credit crisis. I'm not saying that, but the signs are there that it could be happening. We cut everybody's interest rate on their mortgages to 3% in 2020 and 2021. Not that they just stockpiled all those savings away into a savings account. They spent, right? We just credit card debt just eclipsed $1 trillion for the first time. The mortgage debt is at all-time highs, credit card debt all-time highs, car loans at all-time highs, student loans at all-time highs. So we're levered, government debt all-time highs. So we're levered to the hilt at historic highs, but low defaults. And my argument was we have low defaults because the economy has been the hottest in US history. But what if it's not? What happens if it does slow down? What happens to all that debt? And defaults are going up. Now, that's not alarmingly, but they are going up. Mortgage defaults are up. It's mostly affecting people that have 100% financing and low credit scores, all the traditional variables that you would anticipate would be the first to default. But isn't that how it starts? Right? Isn't that how it starts? So I believe that the Fed has navigated a soft landing. That's happened. We're living it today. We are in the soft landing. But I do believe that what the Fed's done has broken the economy and we just haven't experienced it yet.
Interesting. So based on what you're saying there, it sounds to me like if that person goes out today and buys a property and they're getting any one of the very low down payment programs, they better not be going into that with a thought process like we did in 2008. 2008 was basically everybody was buying because they figured that you're going to get a 20% appreciation overnight, and they play in musical chairs, and the song stopped. The credit, the credit all stopped. If they do that now, buying a house at a 7%, saying, well, I'll just wait and refinance it next year when it goes down to 4%, they might find the same exact problem that they had back in 2009.
Well, the danger is, especially when you consider, high loan to value financing, although with the exception of VA, because VA tends to outperform, even though it's 100% financing in most situations. And maybe that's just the state of mind of a veteran. Somebody that was willing to die for their country might be more apt to make a mortgage payment, even if they're strapped. That's just an opinion. Yes, if somebody takes out a high percentage, if you're at 100% financing right now, and let's just say that home prices slide by 5%, you're upside down. You're not refinancing that loan, right? So if you got in today at a 7 and some odd percent interest rate, you could be in a situation very, very easily. Hell, even if the home prices stopped appreciating, even if they didn't appreciate, you'd still be at 100% financing, which would make it very, very challenging for you to be able to refinance at a lower rate, assuming interest rates do come down, which I think, again, is inevitable within the next 12 months. People that bought 100% financing a couple years ago at extremely low interest rates probably have enough equity because of the appreciation they've experienced over the last couple of years to be able to change their situation. But at the same time, they're already at 3% interest rates, so that's not motivating them to necessarily refinance anyway. What we have seen in the mortgage industry, at least especially with us, is a huge uptick in cash out refinances, where people are foregoing their 3% interest rate for a 7% interest rate because they need to. They need to pay off credit cards. They got to pay off all this debt that they've accumulated since they cut their interest rate to 3%. So interest rates aren't necessarily, I know we make a big thing of it and everybody's chasing the lowest interest rate. But for a lot of consumers, it really comes down to what's your monthly debt? What's your monthly debt load? And if we can cut your debt load down by $2,000 a month, is the interest rate relevant anymore?
Yeah, I call it the Ben Franklin rate. How many Ben Franklins come out of your pocket?
Right.
Continue our conversation this morning. Aaron VanTrojen is with us, CEO of Geneva Financial. Aaron, I've got this thing called the RSR two-step. And basically, it's saying, exactly what you said in the last segment. If your household debt is up there and you've got the equity, take a look at it and see what your blended household interest rate is. If it makes sense, do a cash out refinance, get rid of that debt. That's step one. And we know that there's going to be a loan level price adjustment. I'm not going to get into that today for the cash out. And then down the road, as you and I both believe, interest rates are going to come down. It makes sense to restructure your loan again if they do come down and make a better decision for your family. What do you think?
I think it's absolutely imperative. I'm not a big fan of people using their primary residence as a financial tool. I think we've kind of got away from that. I think that my desire not to use it as a financial tool has run away from us a long, long time ago, and people typically do use this as a financial tool. If you've gotten yourself into a situation where you're over levered, regardless of the interest rate that you have on your current mortgage, you may have and likely have a lot of equity in your house that you can use to consolidate that debt and lower your overall monthly expense. Not only lower your monthly expense, but you see the interest rates on your credit cards and your car loans have gone up substantially, especially on credit cards. And you can stop the bleeding, you can stop the pain. The key is, the most important variable is that if you use equity in your house to pay off debt and consolidate debt, is don't borrow again, right? You're just going to be digging a hole. Now, the mortgage industry loves the fact that we are a consumption society because we just know most homeowners are going to just spending, and they're going to go through this cycle every few years. We're going to have to do cash out refinances, consolidate debt, and always need a mortgage, right? That's good for the mortgage industry, but that's not necessarily good for you as a homeowner. So I try to educate homeowners on doing what's in their best financial interest. And if you got yourself, like I said, in that situation, consolidate debt if it makes sense, and it could very well make sense. Lower your monthly payments. Don't get caught up on interest rate. Your interest rate will go up because of where the current interest rate market is now. And again, back to the marry the house and date the rates. I don't like that saying. I think it's a dangerous saying, but in some senses, if you had to do a cash out refinance, consolidate debt, and overall lower your monthly expenses, interest rates are likely lower in 12 months, maybe much, much sooner. So even if you had to cash out and refinance and your mortgage rate went up to 7.5% today, your monthly payments went way, way down on your overall debt load. And you may be in a situation you can refinance in the next 6 months at a much, much lower interest rate and continue that trend. It's not a guarantee. And if you do a cash out, you may not want to max out the maximum loan to value to give yourself some wiggle room if home prices, home values stall out. So you'll be able to take advantage of lower rates when they inevitably do come down.
And the only other thing that I would add to what you said is I agree 100% with what you've said there. If you're going to save $1,000, $2,000, I've seen $3,000 where people will save doing that debt consolidation. Take a good portion of that savings and use that as a principal reduction payment on your new mortgage, right? The idea here isn't for you to go out and buy a new car because you've got more cash available. The idea here is you're doing this as a financial safety net. Take some of that money or all of it and put it back on that mortgage and get that lower interest rate, even if it's 7 or 7.5%, 8%, whatever the number is, better than that 30% you're paying on the credit card. I'll just throw that in there. I wanted to go get one more subject in here, Aaron. We've only got a few minutes left. Now, Geneva Financial, it's a growing company. You started it. I would argue probably if you had your choice, it wouldn't have been started at the time you started. May not have been the best timing in the world, my friend. But is now a good time to get into the industry?
To get into the industry, I mean, it's a challenge. It's an exceptionally challenging time to get into the industry. So I'd say that's also an individual decision. I mean, I got into the industry in 2001. Fairly easy time to get into the industry. A lot less regulation, and the interest rates were starting their downward trajectory, which increased the amount of volume that we were doing. So, the amount of units, the amount of transactions were more plentiful in 2001. I started the company, you're right, in October 2007, probably the very worst time to start a mortgage bank. In hindsight, it turned out to be brilliant. At the time, it was miserable. It was a very challenging time. And I think that, again, for the right people, I happen to be one of the right people to get started the very hardest time. made us as successful as we are as a company, and also as individuals. So if you had an interest in getting into the mortgage business, especially on the sales or origination side, and could figure out how to survive in this market, in this environment, again, the challenge is limited transactions, right? There are plenty of transactions out there. They're just a lot more limited than they were just a couple years ago. So you're going to have to work. You're going to have to hustle. You're going to have to do a lot of things right in order to survive in this market. At the same time, if you learned the fundamentals properly now, this business is going to get better, right? This is probably 2 years of about the hardest market I've ever experienced. In some ways, harder than 2008 and 2009. So it's cyclical. Our industry is cyclical. We're just in a deep dive right now, in a deep valley, but we're going to come out the other side in the not too distant future, and things are going to get a lot easier. So it can be, if you're willing to work and you know it's going to be hard, it could be a great time to get into the business.
What are you doing different at Geneva that is attracting so many people? When I see, we saw Academy Mortgage was just absorbed by somebody else, and there's been 3 or 4 others that are either being absorbed, going out of business, laying off people. There's 600,000 less loan officers I think I saw that renewed their licenses. What are you doing different at Geneva Financial?
I mean, the industry tends to, ebb and flow a lot. We stay a lot more consistent and always have. So while we had big growth in 2020 and 2021, not to the degree that my competition did. And when things get tough, we don't have the deep dives like they do as well. We've stayed very, very profitable over the last 2 years as a company, which is I've been called the unicorn because we're one of the few that has actually been profitable on originations only in the last 2 years. We've never cut compensation, not once in company's history. Most of my competition has cut compensation multiple times in the last 12 months. We have a different culture. I try to hold people more accountable to their professionalism. And I also try to deliver as much as I can from the top as far as education and training and teaching people how to do this business right in the right way for the consumer. And I think that it just has helped us radically outperform the industry in the last 2 years. Now, again, if we go into another mortgage boom, my competition will soar much faster than we will. But also my motivation in this industry has never been to be the biggest. I have zero interest in even being the biggest. I hope I don't even accidentally become the biggest. That's not what I want. Is my goal for over 16 years now, is to create the best. And not only for my consumer, but for the employees. I want to have the best working environment and give people more opportunities that they can get anywhere else.
It's a great philosophy, and I can say from somebody on the inside, as I do lead a lending team, that it's a great place to work, a great company, a great organization, great culture, and you're allowed to grow. So if you've got interest in joining Aaron and what his mission, joingfi.com. Joingfi.com is a website. They do a discovery information where you can find out all about the company and get as much information as you want to make an educated decision. Appreciate your time on coming on and spending some time with us, Aaron. I look forward to having you come back again.